A single mother was pulling expired yogurt from a dumpster behind a $14 billion grocery chain. The billionaire owner was watching her from his office window directly above. He didn't call security. He didn't look away. He didn't close the blinds. Instead, he walked downstairs and asked her one question. Her answer didn't just change her life. It forced him to dismantle a system feeding millions and rebuild it from the ground up. And what he uncovered in the process exposed a truth about America that most people eat 3 times a day but never see. 52-year-old Cedric Moore had built fresh harvest markets from a single store in Atlanta into a grocery empire spanning 340 locations across 26 states. Annual revenue $14.2 billion. Forbes had profiled him twice. CNBC called him the conscience of American food retail. His company slogan hung in brushed copper letters behind every customer service desk in every store, nourishing every community. He believed it. Or at least he had believed it once. Cedric grew up in Bankhead Courts, public housing, West Atlanta, the kind of neighborhood where grocery stores didn't exist and corner shops sold more cigarettes than vegetables. His mother, Dorothy Moore, worked 2 jobs, days at a laundromat, nights cleaning office buildings downtown. She raised Cedric and his younger brother on meals built from whatever was cheapest and whatever stretched the furthest. Rice and beans, canned vegetables, day-old bread from the bakery outlet where the loaves sat in open bins and nobody asked questions. Some months, Dorothy had to choose: prescription refills or a full refrigerator, medicine or meals. No mother should have to make that math. Dorothy made it every 30 days for 11 years. Cedric remembered the sound of her counting coins on the kitchen table after he was supposed to be asleep. The soft clink of quarters. The silence when there weren't enough. That memory built an empire. He opened his first store at 27. A small organic market on Ponce de Leon Avenue. Fresh produce, fair prices, clean aisles. He wanted to build something Dorothy would have walked into and felt welcome. Not watched. Not judged. Just fed. 25 years later, Fresh Harvest Markets was a machine. 340 stores, 18,000 employees, distribution centers in 4 states. His penthouse sat 14 floors above the flagship store in Boston's Back Bay. Floor-to-ceiling glass. A walnut desk the size of a small car. A framed photograph of Dorothy on the shelf beside the window. She had passed 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless, the way the worst things always are. On the opposite wall hung the company slogan in copper: nourishing every community. Cedric could see it from his desk every single day. And every single day he stopped reading it. Success had calcified around him like bone. His schedule was meetings and earnings calls and investor dinners at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than Dorothy used to spend on a week of groceries. He wore suits that cost $4,000. He drove a car that cost more than his childhood apartment building. He lived alone in 5,000 square feet of polished silence. His wife Renee had died 4 years ago. Breast cancer. Slower than Dorothy's death, but no less devastating. Cedric handled it the way he handled quarterly losses. He worked harder, stayed later, filled the silence with spreadsheets and strategy sessions until the grief receded into something manageable. Something he could lock in a drawer and only open when no one was watching. His daughter, Naomi. 24. Smart, fierce, relentless. She had moved to Detroit after college to work in community food access, mutual aid networks, urban farming programs, neighborhood fridges, the kind of work that paid almost nothing and mattered almost everything. She called every Sunday, and almost every Sunday somewhere in the conversation she said the same thing. "You forgot where you came from, Dad." Cedric would change the subject. Mention a new store opening, a charitable partnership, a donation to some hunger relief organization, always tax deductible, always announced with a press release. Naomi never seemed impressed. "I don't need you to write checks, Dad. I need you to look down." He didn't know what she meant. Or maybe he did, and it was easier to pretend he didn't. Because looking down meant seeing what was directly beneath him. Not metaphorically, literally. 9 floors below his office window sat the loading dock of the flagship store. Every night, after closing, employees wheeled out bins. Gray plastic bins on metal carts, heavy with food that had not sold, food that had passed its shelf date, food that was technically fine but no longer met company standards. Those bins were emptied into dumpsters. Every night. 340 stores. Every single night. Cedric knew waste existed in the grocery business. Every CEO did. It was a line item, a cost of operations, a number buried deep in quarterly reports under acceptable shrinkage. He had never once walked downstairs to see what acceptable shrinkage actually looked like. The photograph of Dorothy watched him from the shelf, smiling, patient, waiting for her son to remember something he had spent 25 years trying to forget, that he came from hunger, and hunger was still there, right below his feet. Tamika Hayes had not planned for her life to look like this. 34 years old, 2 children, 7 months without a permanent address. She carried everything that mattered in 2 canvas tote bags, one for each kid. Jalen's bag held his homework folders, a change of clothes, his inhaler, and a flashlight he refused to sleep without. Sade's bag held a stuffed bunny with one ear missing, a Ziploc of crayons, children's Benadryl, and a laminated card listing her allergies: peanuts, tree nuts, sesame. Tamika had written that card herself. Block letters. Clear enough for any emergency room nurse to read in 30 seconds. She knew because she used to be one. Not a nurse exactly. A certified nursing assistant, CNA. She had worked at Brookfield Gardens, a long-term care facility in Dorchester, for 3 years, bathing elderly patients, turning them every 2 hours to prevent bed sores, feeding those who could no longer feed themselves, holding hands during night shifts when the hallways went quiet and fear crept in with the silence. She was good at it, not just competent. Good. The kind of aide residents asked for by name. The kind who remembered which patients liked their coffee with 2 sugars and which ones needed the television on low to fall asleep. Then Sade started getting sick. Asthma. Severe and unpredictable. Attacks that turned a 5-year-old's breathing into a whistle, then a rasp, then silence, the kind of silence that sends a mother running. 3 emergency room visits in 2 months. Each one meant a call to the facility. Each call meant a shift uncovered. Each uncovered shift meant a write-up. The 3rd write-up came with a termination letter. We need reliability, Tamika. Your attendance record shows a pattern we can't sustain. We understand your situation, but we have to be fair to the rest of the team. Fair. That word sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. Without the job, the insurance disappeared. Without insurance, Sade's medication cost $412 a month out of pocket. Without medication, every cold was a coin flip between a cough and an ambulance. Without income, the rent check stopped. 60 days later, the eviction notice arrived. Tamika packed their lives into 4 black garbage bags. That was everything. 4 bags for 3 people. 7 months now, rotating between the shelter on Massachusetts Avenue and the couches of friends who had less and less room each time she asked. The shelter fed adults, sometimes children when supplies allowed, but the meals were unpredictable. Canned soup, white bread, pasta with no protein. Jalen was 10, growing, hungry in a way that showed in his face, in the sharpness of his cheekbones, in the way he ate too fast whenever food appeared. Sade needed fresh food, fruit, yogurt, things that didn't trigger her allergies, things the shelter rarely had. That was how Tamika found the dumpsters. She didn't stumble onto them. She researched, asked other mothers at the shelter, learned which grocery stores threw out what and when, learned that the Fresh Harvest flagship on Boylston Street emptied its bins around 10:15 every night, learned that the food inside those bins was often untouched, sealed, cold, perfectly edible. Yogurt cups past their best-by date by 1 day. Bag salads still crisp, bread baked that morning, organic chicken breasts rewrapped but pulled from shelves because policy said so. She went after 10. Always after the employees left, she moved quickly and quietly. 2 tote bags. Hand sanitizer first, every single time rubbed into her palms before she touched anything. Then she sorted. Dairy in one group, fruit in another. Everything for Sade checked under the glow of her phone screen, label by label, ingredient by ingredient, looking for the words that could send her daughter to the hospital. She put things back. If the seal was broken, back in the bin. If the packaging was damaged, back. If she couldn't verify the ingredients, back. She took only what she could confirm was safe, only what her children needed. She hated this. Not the dirt. Not the smell. Not even the shame, though. Shame followed her like a shadow she could never outrun. She hated the distance, the gap between who she was and where she stood. 11 months ago, she was turning patients in clean sheets, checking vitals, writing care notes in steady handwriting. Now she was reading nutrition labels by flashlight beside a dumpster at 10:30 at night. The distance between those two realities was a canyon, and nobody saw it. Nobody looked down far enough to see where she had fallen. She never cried at the dumpster. Never. Crying was for later. Crying was for the shelter bathroom at midnight. Door-locked water, running face buried in a towel that smelled like industrial bleach. 3 minutes. That was all she allowed. Then she washed her face, checked on Jalen, checked on Saad, opened her notebook. The notebook held everything. Shelter schedules, free clinic hours, job fair dates, food bank locations and their hours, and what they typically stocked. Bus routes to all of them. A system. A map of survival, drawn in ballpoint pen on ruled paper. Tamika Hayes was not waiting to be saved. She was working her way out. One night, one dumpster, one safe meal at a time. At 10:32, on a Tuesday night in March, Cedric Moore was still at his desk. The quarterly report glowed on his laptop screen. Revenue up 11%. Expansion into the Pacific Northwest ahead of schedule. Customer satisfaction scores at an all-time high. Every number pointed in the right direction. Every graph climbed upward. His CFO had sent a note that afternoon. Best quarter in company history. The board will be thrilled. Cedric should have felt something. Pride, satisfaction, the familiar warmth of winning. Instead, he felt the same flat nothing that had settled into his chest sometime after Renee died and never fully left. He leaned back, rubbed his eyes, reached for his coffee, cold, now untouched for over an hour. His gaze drifted toward the window. Not deliberately. Just the way eyes wander when the mind is somewhere else entirely. The loading dock sat 9 floors below, lit by a single floodlight that cast everything in dull yellow. The dumpsters lined the back wall, green steel industrial-sized lids propped open from the night's disposal. A figure moved between them. Small, quick, deliberate. Cedric straightened in his chair. The figure was a woman, alone. She reached into the nearest dumpster with both hands and pulled out something Cedric couldn't identify from 9 stories up. She held it close to her face, paused, then placed it carefully into a bag at her feet. She reached in again, pulled out something else, held it up. This time a small light appeared, her phone. She angled the screen toward whatever she was holding, studying it. Then she placed it in the bag. She reached in a third time, pulled something out, looked at it, put it back. Cedric's hand moved toward his phone, reflex. The security office was 1 speed dial away. Trespassing. Theft of disposed property. A liability issue at minimum. His fingers hovered over the screen. Then he stopped. The woman had pulled out what looked like a yogurt cup. She peeled back the foil lid, held it to her nose, smelled it. Then she wiped the outside of the cup with something from her pocket, a cloth or a napkin, and set it gently into her bag. Not tossed, set, the way you place something fragile on a shelf. That was not how a thief behaved. That was how a mother handled food she was about to give her child. A memory struck him so suddenly he almost flinched. Dorothy coming through the front door with a paper bag tucked under her arm, inside packages of ramen with torn wrappers, a dented can of green beans, a loaf of bread the bakery couldn't sell because the bag had ripped. She spread it all on the counter with the care of someone arranging flowers. "Ain't nothing wrong with food that's been loved twice," she said, smiling like she'd brought home treasure. Cedric hadn't thought about that in 20 years, maybe longer. He had buried it beneath board meetings and brand strategy and the careful architecture of a man who had moved so far from poverty that he'd forgotten what it smelled like. He looked back down. The woman was still there. She had moved to the second dumpster. Same rhythm. Reach in, examine, decide, keep or return. She checked her phone again, probably reading a label in the light of the screen. Then she placed one item back into the dumpster and moved on. She wasn't taking everything. She was choosing, selecting, filtering with a precision that looked almost professional. Cedric watched for 6 full minutes without moving. His coffee grew colder. His quarterly report sat forgotten on the screen behind him. The numbers that had meant everything an hour ago meant nothing now. He looked at the dumpster. Really looked. Not as a line item. Not as acceptable shrinkage. But as what it actually was. A container full of food that his company had decided was no longer worth selling, sitting 15 feet from a woman who needed it badly enough to search through garbage at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. 340 stores, every single night. How many dumpsters? How many women? His phone sat in his hand. He put it down. He looked at Dorothy's photograph on the shelf. She smiled back, patient, knowing. Cedric closed the quarterly report on his laptop. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He took the service elevator down to the loading dock. The service elevator opened onto concrete and cold air. The loading dock smelled like cardboard and overripe fruit, and the metallic tang of refrigeration units running through the night. Cedric's shoes, Italian leather, $600, clicked against the painted floor as he stepped outside. She heard him before she saw him. Tamika's hands froze inside the dumpster. Her whole body went rigid the way prey stiffens when it senses movement. She turned slowly. Her eyes found him standing near the freight door, backlit by the fluorescent glow of the service corridor. A man in a suit, expensive, standing very still. Her hands came out of the dumpster empty. She stepped back. 1 step, 2. I'm sorry. The words came immediately, automatic, rehearsed by months of being told she didn't belong. I wasn't stealing. These were in the trash. They were thrown away. I'll leave. Please don't call the police. Her voice was steady, but thin, controlled panic, wrapped in practiced calm. She had given this speech before, to security guards, to store managers, to strangers who looked at her like she was something to be managed rather than someone to be seen. Cedric felt the words land somewhere deep in his chest. An apology for taking food from a garbage bin. She was apologizing for feeding her children from his company's waste. You don't need to apologize, he said. Tamika blinked. That was not the response she had prepared for. Cedric took a step closer. Slowly. The way you approach someone who has been given every reason to run. What's your name? She hesitated. Names were personal. Names were leverage. Names were what police wrote on reports and landlords wrote on eviction notices. Tamika, she said finally. Quiet. Guarded. Tamika. How long have you been coming here? Her jaw tightened. 3 months. Give or take. 3 months. Cedric absorbed that. 3 months of nights behind his building, 9 floors directly beneath his office, and he had never once looked down. You have children. A flicker of something crossed her face. Protective instinct. 2, 10, and 5. She didn't offer their names. Names were currency she wasn't willing to spend on a stranger in a suit who might still call the cops. Cedric nodded. He glanced at her bags. The 2 canvas totes sat on the ground beside her feet, organized with a precision that stopped him mid-thought. One bag had dairy products grouped together. Yogurt cups stacked neatly. A carton of milk tucked upright. The other held produce. Apples in a separate plastic bag. Bananas. A container of strawberries. Everything separated. Everything sorted. A small Ziploc bag sat on top, labeled in marker. Sod. No nuts. He stared at that Ziploc bag for a long time. Then he looked at the dumpster. Really looked. For the first time since he'd built this building, he leaned over the edge and saw what was inside. Yogurt cups sealed, untouched, Best By date yesterday. Bagged salad with 2 days left before it even started wilting. Loaves of artisan bread still soft through the plastic. Organic chicken breast rewrapped and labeled, pulled from the shelf because company policy required removal 48 hours before the printed date. This was one dumpster, one store, one night. He straightened up slowly. His throat felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. How much of this is still good, he asked. Not to Tamika, to himself. But she answered anyway. Most of it. Her voice was no longer shaking. It was flat, matter of fact, the voice of someone who had done the math long before anyone else bothered. The yogurt is fine for at least a week past that date. The bread is 1 day old. The chicken is still cold. The salads are perfect. She paused. You throw away more food in one night than the shelter on Mass Ave serves in a week. The sentence hung between them in the cold air like breath made visible. Cedric didn't respond. He didn't have a response. He had a company that printed the words, nourishing every community on every wall and every bag and every receipt, and he was standing in front of a dumpster that proved those words were a lie. He looked at Tamika. She looked back, not pleading, not performing, just standing there. A woman with 2 canvas bags and a Ziploc labeled with her daughter's name, waiting to see if this man in the expensive suit was going to take away the only reliable source of food her children had. Cedric didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't pull out a check or a business card or any of the things men like him usually offered when confronted with poverty. Instead, he asked a question. If you ran this store, what would you do with all this food? Tamika stared at him. The question landed like something foreign. Nobody had ever asked her that. Not a caseworker, not a shelter director, not a single person in the 7 months since her life collapsed. People asked her what she needed, what she didn't have, what went wrong. Nobody asked what she would do if she had the power to fix it. She was quiet for a long time. The loading dock hummed with the sound of refrigeration units. A truck rumbled past on the street beyond the fence. Then she spoke. The shelters don't have enough protein. They get canned vegetables, pasta bread, always bread. But growing kids need protein. Dairy, fresh fruit, things with actual nutrition. The food banks are the same. They take shelf-stable donations because that's what's easy to store. But nobody is donating the fresh stuff. The yogurt, the chicken, the eggs, that all goes in the dumpster because it's harder to move fast enough. She pointed at the bin behind her. That yogurt in there, the Best By date was yesterday. But Best By is not an expiration date. It's a quality suggestion. The manufacturer is saying it might not taste perfect after that date. It doesn't mean it's unsafe. Most people don't know the difference. Most companies don't bother to explain it, so they throw it all away and call it policy. Cedric said nothing. He was listening in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. Not the way he listened in board meetings filtering for actionable data. He was listening the way you listen when someone is telling you something you should have already known. Tamika kept going. Her voice was steady now, not nervous, not performing, just clear. If I ran this store, I'd have a section, right inside the front door. Rescued food, marked down 90%. Yogurt for 10 cents, bread for a quarter, chicken for 50 cents a pound. Families on food stamps could stretch their benefits 3 times as far. And everything that didn't sell by end of day would go straight to a shelter, not a warehouse, not a distribution center. Directly to the kitchen where someone is cooking dinner for 40 people tonight. She paused. I'd train the employees too. Right now, they're just following a checklist. Pull it, bin it, done. But if someone taught them to sort to separate what's actually expired from what's just past the label date, you'd cut your waste in half overnight. Maybe more. Cedric felt something shift in his chest. Not the dramatic crack of revelation. Something quieter, a lock turning. A door he hadn't known was closed beginning to open. This woman, standing beside a dumpster, in a second-hand coat with hand sanitizer still drying on her palms, had just described a food recovery system, more thoughtful and more practical than anything his 200-person operations team had ever proposed. Not because they couldn't, because they'd never been asked. Because no one in his company had ever stood where she was standing. No one in his boardroom had ever needed to read an ingredient label by phone light to keep their child out of the emergency room. No one with a corner office had ever mapped the distance between a dumpster and a shelter kitchen and thought this could be a straight line instead of a dead end. Cedric looked at her for a long moment. What did you say your name was? Tamika? Tamika Hayes. He nodded slowly. The kind of nod that carries weight. Tamika. I'm Cedric Moore. I own this store. All 340 of them. Tamika's face didn't change the way he expected. No shock, no wide eyes, no collapse into gratitude or fear. She just looked at him, steady, measuring. Then she glanced at the dumpster back at him and said one sentence that landed like a stone dropped into still water. Then you should know what you're throwing away. Cedric Moore arrived at the flagship store at 6:15 the next morning, earlier than anyone on his executive team, earlier than the shift managers, earlier than the delivery trucks. He didn't go to his office. He didn't check his email. He walked directly to the back of the store, past the dairy coolers, past the bakery prep station, past the employee break room that smelled like stale coffee and microwaved leftovers, and into the warehouse. The waste log sat in a binder on the warehouse manager's desk. Green cover, metal clasp, updated nightly. Cedric had never opened it. He opened it now. The numbers were organized by category: dairy, bakery, produce, deli, meat. Each column listed the date, the item, the quantity, and the reason for disposal. The reason column was the same on nearly every line: past best, by date, policy removal, shelf life compliance. Cedric flipped through the past 7 days. His finger traced the totals at the bottom of each page. Monday, 412 pounds. Tuesday, 389. Wednesday, 431. Thursday, 397. Friday, 458. Saturday, 503. Sunday, 211. Total for 1 week at one store: 2,801 pounds. He stared at the number, wrote it on the edge of the page in pencil. Then he did the math that Tamika had already done in her head standing beside a dumpster. 340 stores. If even half of them generated similar waste. 950,000 pounds per week, roughly 50 million pounds per year. His hand stopped moving. The warehouse manager appeared at 7. A man named Dennis, 50s, reliable 2 decades with the company. He found his CEO sitting at his desk reading the waste log like scripture. "Mr. Moore, is everything all right?" Dennis Cedric said, not looking up. "This food we're disposing of. How much of it is actually unsafe to eat?" Dennis hesitated. The question had never been asked. Not like this. Not by someone who actually wanted the answer. "Honestly, sir, most of it is fine. The dairy is usually good for another week. The bread is a day old. The produce has cosmetic issues, bruising odd shapes, but it's perfectly edible. The chicken and fish, we pull it 48 hours before the printed date. It's still well within USDA safety guidelines when it goes in the bin. 63%, Cedric said quietly, reading from a line Dennis had written himself. 63% of what we disposed this week was still safe to consume. Dennis nodded slowly. "That sounds about right. Why do we throw it away?" "Company policy, sir. Legal told us years ago that it's safer to dispose than to donate. Liability exposure. If someone gets sick from donated food, we're on the hook. That's what we were told." Cedric closed the binder. He picked up his phone and called the head of legal. A woman named Patricia Yates, sharp, efficient, billable by the quarter hour. "Patricia, quick question. Is there a federal law that protects companies from liability when they donate food in good faith?" Silence on the other end. Then, a careful answer. "Yes. Yes. The Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, signed in 1996, it provides civil and criminal liability protection to good faith food donors. As long as the food meets safety standards at the time of donation, the donor is protected." Cedric's jaw tightened. "Have we ever used it?" Another pause, longer this time. "No. It's never been formally raised as a consideration in our disposal policy." "Never raised," Cedric repeated. The words tasted like rust. "It's not unusual," Patricia added quickly. "Most major retailers default to disposal. It's simpler from a compliance standpoint. Less risk, less paperwork, less risk." Cedric let that phrase sit in the air. Less risk for the company. Infinite cost for the people standing behind their dumpsters at 10:30 at night. He hung up. He sat alone in the warehouse for a long time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Forklifts beeped in the distance. The morning crew was starting to arrive. Cedric pulled out his phone again. Not to call legal, not to call his CFO. He called his daughter. It rang 3 times. Naomi picked up, groggy. It was barely 7 in Detroit. "Dad, everything okay?" Cedric paused. He had not called his daughter to say anything real in years. Every call was surface. Weather, work, health. The polite architecture of distance. "I think you were right," he said. Silence. Long enough that he thought the call had dropped. Write about what? About me forgetting. About where I came from. About what I've been looking away from. He heard her breathing change, not shock. Something softer. Relief. What happened, Dad? Cedric looked at the waste log still open on the desk beside him. 2,800 pounds. One store. 1 week. I'll tell you everything, he said. But first I need to fix something. That night, Cedric didn't sleep. He sat at the desk in his penthouse with his laptop open reading. Not earnings reports. Not expansion projections. Not the comfortable language of growth and margins he'd spent 25 years swimming in. He was reading about waste. The numbers arrived one after another like blows to the chest. Every year, the United States throws away roughly 80 million tons of food. 80 million? That's the weight of every car registered in the state of California, loaded onto trucks, and driven straight into a landfill every single year. 35% of all food produced in the country never reaches a human mouth. It rots in warehouses. It sits in dumpsters. It decomposes in landfills, where it produces methane, a greenhouse gas 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide in its first 20 years. And while all that food decays, 44 million Americans live in food insecurity. That's not hunger exactly. That's the space just before hunger, the uncertainty, the math every night. The choosing. 13 million of those 44 million are children. 13 million kids in the richest country on earth, going to bed not knowing if tomorrow's meals are guaranteed. Cedric read that number 3 times. 13 million children. That's roughly every first grader in America. Every one of them, looking at an empty cabinet, or a stretched paycheck, or a mother doing mental arithmetic at the grocery store, putting things back on the shelf, one at a time. He thought about Sade. 5 years old, peanut allergy. Her mother reading labels beside a dumpster by phone light because the system that was supposed to feed her had already given up. He read about the labels next. Best by, sell by, use by. 3 phrases that most Americans treat as identical, but none of them mean what people think. Best by is a manufacturer's estimate of peak quality, not safety. Sell by is an inventory management tool for retailers. Use by is the closest thing to an actual safety date, but even that is often conservative. The FDA does not regulate date labels on any food product in the United States except infant formula. Not milk, not meat, not produce, not canned goods. Every other date on every other product is set by the manufacturer based on their own standards. No federal oversight. No required methodology. No consistency. Cedric pushed back from his laptop. He pulled up his company's financial report from last quarter. $340 million in profit. He already knew that number. He presented it to the board himself. Then he opened the operations report. Found the waste line. Scrolled past the euphemisms. Acceptable shrinkage. Inventory adjustment. Product life cycle management. The real number sat at the bottom. Estimated value of food disposed Q3, $50 million. He picked up a pen, found a legal pad, wrote 2 lines. We profit from selling food. We also profit from wasting it. The waste is built into the margin. He stared at those words until his vision blurred. Nourishing every community. That was his slogan, his promise. Copper letters on every wall. He looked at Dorothy's photograph on the shelf across the room. She smiled back the way she always did. Patient, warm, undeceived. Ain't nothing wrong with food that's been loved twice. His mother had known. A woman with no degree, no title, no boardroom. She had understood something about food and dignity and waste that a $14 billion company had systemically chosen to ignore. Cedric closed his laptop. He didn't have answers yet, but he had something he hadn't carried in a long time. The weight of knowing. And the inability to unknow. While Cedric sat in his penthouse reading about waste, Tamika Hayes lay on a shelter cot 7 miles away staring at the ceiling. The cot was narrow, metal frame, thin mattress that smelled like disinfectant and the 100 bodies that had slept on it before hers. The overhead light was off, but the hallway fluorescence leaked through the gap beneath the door. They never went fully dark in shelters. Something was always on, always humming. Always reminding you that this was not a home. Jalen slept on the cot beside hers. 10 years old. long legs folded to fit, his backpack tucked under his pillow. Not because it was comfortable, because he'd learned that things disappeared in shelters if you didn't guard them. The backpack held his homework. 2 pencils. A library book about space that was 3 weeks overdue because they'd moved shelters twice since he checked it out, and wrapped in a plastic bag, at the very bottom 2 granola bars and a string cheese, food he'd hidden there himself. Not because Tamika hadn't fed him, but because his body had learned something his mind was too young to name. That food could vanish, that a full stomach tonight didn't promise one tomorrow. Tamika knew about the hidden food. She'd seen him slip the granola bars in when he thought she wasn't watching. She didn't say anything. What could she say? Her 10-year-old son was stockpiling calories like a survivalist because that was the most rational response his brain could produce to 7 months of instability. Sade slept between them. 5 years old, curled into a comma shape, the stuffed bunny with one ear pinned under her chin. Her breathing was steady tonight. No wheeze, no rattle, a good night. Tamika had learned to measure time in Sade's breathing. Good nights and bad nights. Quiet inhales and the ones that whistled at the edges, the ones that meant a trip to the emergency room was coming whether they could afford it or not. 3 months ago, Sade had asked a question. They were walking from the shelter to the bus stop. Sade was holding Tamika's hand, looking at a house they passed every day. Yellow door, flower pots on the porch, a bicycle in the yard. Mama, are we poor? Tamika's throat had closed. Not from sadness, from the violence of a 5-year-old needing to categorize her own existence. We're in between, baby. We're on our way to something better. Saad had accepted that the way children accept weather. Without argument, without understanding. Just the quiet trust that the person holding your hand knows where they're going. Tamika wasn't sure she did, but she kept walking. 7 months ago she had been a different woman. Same face, same hands, different life. She remembered the morning she lost her job like a photograph burned into the back of her eyes. The facility director's office, beige walls, a motivational poster about teamwork. The director across the desk, kind face, practiced tone. We need reliability, Tamika. Your attendance record shows 11 unscheduled absences in 8 weeks. My daughter has asthma. She was hospitalized 3 times in 2 months. I had no one else to take her. I understand, and I'm sorry, but we have to be fair to the rest of the team. Fair. That word again. The same word that had ended her career was the same word the system used to justify every door it closed. Fair to the team. Fair to the landlord. Fair to the company. Never fair to the mother holding a nebulizer over a 5-year-old's face at 3 in the morning. After the job, the insurance went. After the insurance, the medication became $412 a month. After the medication bills, the rent went unpaid. After 2 months unpaid, the eviction notice appeared taped to her door like a verdict. She packed their lives into 4 black garbage bags. That was the inventory of everything 3 people owned. 4 bags. They fit in the back seat of the bus to the shelter. That was 7 months ago. Now Tamika lay on the cot listening to her children breathe. She reached under her pillow for the notebook. Spiral bound. Dollar store. Pages wrinkled from use. Inside was a system. Her system. Monday and Wednesday, the food bank on Blue Hill Avenue opened at 9. They usually had canned goods and bread, sometimes apples. Tuesday and Thursday, the free clinic in Roxbury took walk-ins for pediatric asthma. Every other Friday, a church on Columbus Avenue served hot lunch, no questions asked. The first Saturday of each month, a job fair ran at the community college. She had attended every single one, handed out her resume. CNA certified, 3 years of experience. Excellent references. Every time the same response. We'll be in touch. No one ever was. The notebook also held her dumpster schedule. Which stores discarded when. What they typically threw away. Temperature guidelines she'd researched herself at the public library. How long dairy lasts past the label date. How to tell if chicken has turned. How to check for mold beneath a berry container's surface. She had built a science of survival on lined paper with a ballpoint pen. Tamika closed the notebook, slid it back under her pillow, beside the hand sanitizer she was never without. She didn't cry. Not now. Crying was for later. Crying was for the bathroom down the hall after midnight when the only sounds were pipes and the distant hum of the heating unit. She would go there soon. Lock the door. Turn on the faucet. Press a towel against her face. 3 minutes, that was the allowance. 3 minutes to feel everything she spent, the other 23 hours and 57 minutes refusing to feel. Then she would wash her face. Walk back to the cots. Check Jalen's breathing. Check Said's breathing. Open the notebook. Review tomorrow's plan. Tamika Hayes was not waiting for anyone to save her. She was climbing out of a hole the system had dug one rung at a time with bleeding hands and a plan written in a dollar store notebook, and she refused, absolutely refused to stop moving. 3 days later, Cedric called an emergency board meeting. The conference room sat on the 9th floor. Glass walls, a mahogany table long enough to seat 14. 11 board members filed in at 8 sharp, each one carrying a leather portfolio and a coffee from the executive lounge. Combined net worth in that room north of $2 billion. Combined experience in food retail over 150 years. Combined time spent standing beside a dumpster at night watching food rot. 0. Cedric stood at the head of the table. No slides, no presentation deck. Just a printed report he'd assembled himself over 3 sleepless nights. He laid it out plainly. Fresh Harvest Markets disposes an estimated 50 million pounds of food annually across its 340 locations. 63% of that food is still safe for human consumption at the time it enters the dumpster. The company spends approximately $12 million a year on waste disposal logistics. The retail value of the food destroyed exceeds $50 million per quarter. He paused. Let the numbers breathe. I'm proposing a complete overhaul of our food disposal policy. Effective immediately. 3 components. First, all food that meets USDA safety guidelines at the time of removal gets donated directly to food banks and shelters. Not warehoused, not delayed, donated same day. Second, we create a designated section in every store called Second Harvest. Rescued food clearly labeled priced at 75 to 90% discount, available to all customers, especially families using SNAP benefits. Third, we partner with community kitchens in every city where we operate. Surplus that doesn't move through donation or discount gets cooked into meals the same night. The room was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then the CFO spoke. Raymond Giles, 61, Harvard MBA, 30 years in corporate finance. He had a voice like polished granite. Cedric, the logistics restructuring alone will cost us $12 million minimum. Cold chain compliance for donations, liability insurance adjustments, staffing, training, transportation. You're talking about rebuilding our entire back-end waste infrastructure. Patricia Yates, the legal counsel, spoke next. And the liability exposure is significant. Even with the Good Samaritan Act, state regulations vary. If one person claims illness from donated food, we're looking at class action territory. The legal risk is not trivial. Then the marketing director, a woman named Alicia Chen. Sharp. Brand obsessed in the way that kept Fresh Harvest positioned as premium organic. Our brand identity is built on freshness and quality. Putting near-expired products on shelves, even in a separate section, sends a message that contradicts everything our customers associate with Fresh Harvest. We've spent 15 years building a premium perception. This could erode it in months. Cedric listened to every word. These were not villains. These were professionals doing exactly what they'd been hired to do. Protect the company, minimize risk, maximize value. The machine worked perfectly. That was the problem. It worked so perfectly that it couldn't see past its own efficiency. He responded without raising his voice. Raymond, we currently spend $12 million on waste logistics, hauling food to landfills, paying disposal fees, managing the bins. I'm not adding cost, I'm redirecting it. The enhanced tax deduction for food donation under Section 170E3 allows corporations to deduct the cost of donated food at up to twice its basis value. Our tax team estimates the annual benefit between $8 and $14 million. We'd be net positive within 18 months. He turned to Patricia. The Good Samaritan Act provides blanket civil and criminal protection for good faith food donations. We've had this shield available since 1996 and never used it. I'm not asking us to take a risk. I'm asking us to stop ignoring a protection that already exists." He turned to Alicia. "Gen Z makes up 32% of our customer growth this year. 73% of them say they prefer brands with active sustainability practices. Putting rescued food on our shelves doesn't damage our brand. It defines it. We either lead on this or someone else does, and then we're playing catch-up on a story we should have written ourselves." Silence again. Longer this time. Then Denise Okafor spoke. Board member. Quiet. Rarely the first to talk. Background in nonprofit management before she crossed into corporate governance. She looked directly at Cedric. "Who brought this to your attention?" Cedric paused. The question sat in the air, like a door waiting to be opened. "A woman I found going through our dumpster at 10 o'clock at night. She knew more about our food waste problem than anyone in this room, including me." Nobody responded. The only sound was the ventilation system and the distant hum of the city 9 floors below, where right now, somewhere behind the building, a dumpster was already being filled again. The vote came that afternoon. 6-5. Against. Cedric stared at the tally. He had built this company from a single store. He had hired half the people sitting in that room. He had taken Fresh Harvest from a local Atlanta market to a national brand, and for the first time in a decade, his own board had told him no. His first instinct was to override. The company's articles of incorporation gave the CEO authority to enact operational changes unilaterally in cases of urgent business necessity. His lawyers could frame this. He could push the policy through by morning and deal with the board fallout later. His hand hovered over his phone. One call to Patricia, one memo, done. But he stopped, because forcing it would make him exactly what the system already was. A man with power imposing his will from the top of a building, never asking the people below whether they understood or agreed. That was how the waste policy had been created in the first place. Handed down, unquestioned, obeyed without thought. He wasn't going to fix a broken system by breaking another one. Instead, he sent one email. To all 11 board members. The subject line was simple. Tomorrow night, 10:45. Loading dock. Come see what our policy looks like. 9 of the 11 showed up. They stood in the cold March air in overcoats that cost more than most families spent on food in a month. The loading dock was lit by a single floodlight. The dumpsters sat against the back wall, lids propped open, filled from that evening's disposal. Cedric didn't give a speech. He walked to the nearest dumpster and lifted the lid the rest of the way. "Look," he said. They looked. Organic chicken breast. Sealed, cold, pulled 48 hours before the printed date. Bags of mixed greens, crisp and green Best Buy, stamped for yesterday. Yogurt cups, foil intact, untouched. Loaves of sourdough bread, still soft through the plastic. Cartons of milk, with 6 days left on the use-by date, pulled because the sell-by had passed. Raymond, the CFO, reached in and picked up a bag of organic baby spinach. He turned it over. Read the label. Open the seal. The leaves were perfect, fresh, the kind of spinach his wife bought every Sunday for their breakfast smoothies. He stood there holding it and said nothing. Patricia, the legal counsel, stared at a row of sealed yogurt cups. Strawberry, blueberry, vanilla, 12 cups, all identical to the ones in the dairy aisle, 20 feet away on the other side of the wall. Same product. Same seal. Same cold chain. The only difference was a date that had passed 12 hours ago. Cedric spoke quietly. This is one store, one night. Multiply by 340. Every single day of the year. This is what our policy looks like when it lands in a dumpster. Nobody argued. Nobody cited liability. Nobody mentioned brand perception. They just stood there, 9 people in expensive coats staring at food they'd authorized to be thrown away without ever once seeing where it went. After 10 minutes, they filed back toward the building in silence. The kind of silence that sits heavy in the chest. The kind that happens when people realize they've been looking at a spreadsheet when they should have been looking out a window. Raymond was the last to leave. He paused at the service door, turned back to Cedric. "I didn't know it was like this," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the polish he wore in boardrooms. Just a man who had seen something he couldn't unsee. Cedric nodded. That was enough. Not a vote, not a promise, but a crack. The kind of crack that lets light through. And light, once it enters, is very hard to shut back out. 1 week later, Cedric walked into the shelter on Massachusetts Avenue. He wore no suit, khakis, a plain jacket, no briefcase, no assistant. He carried nothing except a business card and a job offer he'd written himself. Tamika was sitting at a folding table near the back of the common room, helping Jalen with math homework. Sade sat on the floor beside them, drawing something with crayons on the back of a donated coloring page. The bunny with one ear sat propped against her knee supervising. Tamika saw Cedric enter, and her body stiffened. Recognition, then confusion, then the careful blankness of someone who had learned not to expect anything good from unexpected visitors. He pulled up a metal folding chair and sat across from her. "I didn't come here to give you anything," he said. "I came to offer you a job." Tamika stared at him. "A job? Community Food Recovery Coordinator. It's a new position. I created it 3 days ago, based on everything you told me that night behind the store. Salary $52,000 a year. Full medical, dental, and vision for you and both your children. Housing transition assistance while you find a permanent apartment. And the job itself, you'd be designing and running the food recovery system across our stores. Starting with the flagship. Starting with the dumpster where I found you." Tamika didn't move. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Her jaw tightened the way it did when she was fighting something internal. "Is this real?" "Yes. Is this pity?" Cedric leaned forward. "Tamika, pity is handing someone a sandwich. This is handing someone a salary because they earned it. You solved a problem my entire executive team couldn't see. 200 people in operations, and not one of them ever stood where you stood or thought what you thought. You didn't just describe a food recovery program. You described a system, a real one, with logistics, with priorities, with the kind of detail that only comes from someone who has lived inside the problem." Tamika's eyes were wet, but her voice held. "What exactly would I do? You'd build the system you described to me that night. You'd work with store managers, shelter directors, food bank coordinators. You'd decide what gets rescued, what gets discounted, what goes to community kitchens. You'd train the staff. You'd set the standards. And you'd be the voice of every person we've been ignoring, while we called ourselves a company that nourishes communities." Tamika looked at Jalen. He was watching Cedric with wide alert eyes, pencil frozen in his hand. She looked at Sade, still drawing, humming to herself, unaware that the shape of her life might be changing in this very moment. "I need to think about it," Tamika said. Cedric nodded, placed his business card on the table, stood up. "Take your time. That number works day or night." He turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look back, didn't add conditions, didn't hover. He just left the decision where it belonged, in her hands. That evening at 8:47, Tamika's name appeared on his phone. He answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of someone who had made a decision not from gratitude, but from purpose. "I'll do it, but I have one condition." "Name it." "I want to start at the store where you found me. That dumpster. That's where the program begins. Not in a boardroom, not on a spreadsheet. Right there, where the food hits the bin and the people who need it are standing 10 feet away in the dark." Cedric closed his eyes, pressed the phone against his ear. "Done," he said. And in that single word, something shifted between them. Not charity, not rescue, partnership. Two people standing on equal ground for the first time, each carrying something the other needed. She had the knowledge. He had the keys. And together, they were about to open a door that had been locked from the inside for 25 years. 6 weeks later, the flagship store on Boylston Street opened its doors at 7 in the morning like it did every other day. Same automatic sliding glass, same polished floors, same rows of organic produce misted with filtered water under halogen lights. But just inside the entrance to the right of the shopping carts, something new. A section. 15 feet of dedicated refrigerator and shelving space. Separate from the main aisles. Clean, bright, clearly labeled. A banner hung overhead in forest green and white. Second Harvest. Good food second chance. The refrigerator held yogurt cups, milk cartons, cheese blocks, deli containers of hummus and sliced turkey. All sealed, all cold, all within safe consumption windows. The shelves beside it held bread, granola bars, canned soups, bags of rice, boxes of pasta. Produce bins along the bottom row held apples with minor bruising, bags of salad, one day past their Best Buy label, bananas just beginning to spot. Every item had a price tag, not the original price, a new one. Organic whole milk, normally $5.99, now 50 cents. Sourdough loaf, normally $4.75, now 35 cents. Chicken breast, normally $8.49 a pound, now 75 cents. A small printed card sat beside the register at the section entrance. This food is safe, inspected, and ready to eat. It has been rescued from disposal as part of Fresh Harvest Market's Second Harvest program. Questions? Ask any team member. Tamika Hayes stood at the center of it. She wore a Fresh Harvest polo shirt, dark green. Her name badge clipped to the left side. Tamika Hayes, Community Food Recovery Coordinator. In her hand, a clipboard. On the clipboard, a checklist she had written herself. Refrigerator temperature logged at 36 degrees. Product rotation verified. Shelter pickup confirmed for 5:30 that evening. Community kitchen delivery scheduled for 6:15. She moved through the section with a focus that came from somewhere deeper than job training. She checked labels, adjusted items on shelves, spoke to a stock clerk named DeAndre about separating dairy from produce in the backroom cooler. If it's safe to eat, it's safe to give, she told him. That's the only rule. Everything else is logistics. DeAndre nodded. He'd been with Fresh Harvest for 3 years and had never once questioned what went into the dumpster. Now he was sorting it instead of dumping it, and the work felt different. Not harder, just more honest. By 9:30, customers had begun noticing the new section. Some walked past without looking. Some glanced curious, unsure what to make of discounted food in a premium store. A few stopped, read the sign, picked up an item, put it in their cart. Then, a young woman walked in. She was maybe 26. Thin coat, worn sneakers. A toddler balanced on her hip, bundled in a jacket too warm for the weather because she only owned one. She moved through the main aisles quickly, the way people move when they're counting every dollar before they spend it. She found the Second Harvest section and stopped. Her eyes scanned the prices. She reached for a carton of organic whole milk, turned it over, read the label, looked at the price sticker, 50 cents. She held it against her chest. Her chin dropped. Her shoulders began to shake. Tamika saw her from across the section. She didn't rush over, didn't ask if she was okay, didn't offer a speech or a pamphlet or a corporate smile. She walked over slowly, stood beside her, placed one hand on her shoulder. She understood that moment. She had lived inside it. She knew the specific weight of holding food you can afford for the first time in months and realizing you don't have to put it back. The woman looked at Tamika through wet eyes. Is this real? Tamika nodded. It's real. Take what you need. The woman filled a small basket. Milk, yogurt, bread, apples, cheese sticks for the toddler. The total came to $3.12. $3. For a bag of groceries that would have cost $38 on the other side of the aisle, for food that 48 hours earlier would have been in a dumpster. By the end of the first week, the flagship store's Second Harvest section had rescued 4,200 pounds of food. 0 customer complaints, 0 food safety violations. Every item logged, tracked, temperature verified, and compliant with USDA standards. 14 shelters received direct deliveries. 6 food banks restocked their fresh sections for the first time in months. A community kitchen in Roxbury served hot meals 4 nights that week using surplus produce and protein. The dumpster behind the store was still there, but it was half empty. 6 months later, Second Harvest operated in 87 stores across 11 states. The numbers told a story that no boardroom objection could argue with. 2.1 million pounds of food rescued from disposal. 340,000 meals created through community kitchen partnerships. 12 shelter organizations receiving weekly deliveries of fresh produce, dairy, and protein. 47 new employees hired through the program's community staffing initiative. People recruited from the neighborhoods the stores served. People with lived experience in food insecurity, trained and employed to run the recovery process from the inside out, the way Tamika had been. Local news covered the flagship launch in Boston. Then a national outlet picked it up. Then another. A reporter from a morning show sat across from Cedric in his office, camera rolling, and asked the question everyone wanted answered. Why now? After 25 years, why change the policy now? Cedric paused. He could have talked about the data, the margins, the tax incentives, the brand positioning. All of it true, all of it real. But none of it was the reason. Because someone showed me what I'd been stepping over every day, he said. I built a company that feeds millions of people, and I didn't know what was happening behind my own building. Someone had to show me, and she did, the reporter pressed. Who can we talk to her? Cedric shook his head. I asked. She said no, and I respect that. This isn't about one person's story. It's about a system that needed to change. He didn't say Tamika's name on camera. She'd asked him not to. She didn't want to be the face of the program. She wanted to be the engine. The difference mattered to her, and it mattered to him. Beyond Fresh Harvest, the ripple had begun to spread. 2 competing grocery chains contacted Cedric's team to study the model. A congressman from Massachusetts referenced Second Harvest during a subcommittee hearing on food waste reduction legislation. A nonprofit coalition invited Tamika, not Cedric, to consult on scaling community food recovery programs in 3 other cities. Cedric sat in his office the evening after the broadcast aired. The city darkened outside the glass. He looked at the photograph of Dorothy on the shelf. Her smile, her patience, the way she had carried an entire family on a housekeeper's wages and never once let her children feel poor. Ain't nothing wrong with food that's been loved twice. That sentence, his mother's sentence, it now hung on a printed banner in 87 stores, in forest green and white, right above the rescued food. If this story is making you think about the food you see thrown away every day, take a second to subscribe. We tell stories that don't just touch your heart. They challenge the systems around you. Now let's continue. Tamika moved into the apartment on a Saturday in October. 2 bedrooms. 3rd floor. A brick building on a quiet street in Dorchester, 4 blocks from Jalen's school. The landlord had asked for first month last month and a security deposit. Tamika paid it herself. From her paycheck, from her job, from work she did every single day that mattered to people she would never meet. The apartment was not luxurious. Laminate counters. Carpet that had seen better decades. A bathroom where the faucet dripped if you didn't turn the handle all the way. But the windows faced east, and morning light came in gold, and the door had a deadbolt that locked from the inside. Jalen's room had a desk. A real desk. Wood. 4 legs. A drawer that stuck a little, but opened if you pulled at the right angle. He set his library book on top of it the first night. Then his pencils. Then the backpack that had served as his pillow for 7 months. He didn't hide food under his pillow anymore. It took 3 weeks for that habit to stop. But it stopped. Sade's room had a bed with a butterfly nightlight plugged into the wall beside it. She put the 1-eared bunny on the pillow and announced that this was their room now hers, and the bunnies and nobody else was allowed in without knocking. Tamika stood in the kitchen on the first evening. She opened the refrigerator. Milk, eggs, yogurt, chicken thighs, broccoli, apples, string cheese for Sade, orange juice for Jalen, leftovers from the dinner she'd cooked on the stove that was hers in the kitchen, that was hers in the apartment she paid for with money she earned. She stood there for 3 seconds, door open, cold air drifting out, just looking, full. The fridge was full, and so was she. She closed the door, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, started packing lunches for tomorrow. 14 miles away, Cedric Moore stood in his penthouse kitchen for the first time in 4 years, with the stove actually on. The kitchen was enormous, marble counters, a 6-burner range he had never used, a refrigerator the size of a closet that his housekeeper stocked with things he never cooked. The kitchen had been a showroom, a photograph of a life that didn't exist. Tonight it smelled like garlic and onions. Naomi had flown in from Detroit, first visit in 2 years. She stood beside him at the counter chopping bell peppers, laughing at the way he held a knife like he was afraid it might bite back. Dad, you're mincing, not dicing. There's a difference. There's a difference between a lot of things I didn't pay attention to, Cedric said. Naomi looked at him. Not the suspicious look she used to give when he talked about charity or community. Something softer. Something that had been waiting behind her eyes for a long time. This is the version of you I've been waiting for, Dad. Cedric didn't respond right away. He just stood there chopping peppers badly in a kitchen that finally smelled like food instead of emptiness. They ate at the dining table. Not the one in the formal dining room that seated 12, the small one in the kitchen nook. The one Renee used to sit at with her morning coffee, the one Cedric had avoided since she died because the empty chair across from him was louder than any boardroom silence. Naomi sat in that chair now, and it didn't feel empty anymore. They talked about Detroit, about mutual aid networks and urban gardens, and a woman named Ruth who ran a community fridge out of her garage and fed 40 families a week on volunteer labor and donated produce. They talked about Second Harvest, about Tamika, about Dorothy. Cedric told Naomi about the night on the loading dock, about the yogurt cup and the phone light and the Ziploc bag labeled with a child's name, about a question asked in the dark that changed the direction of a company. Naomi listened the way she did when something mattered enough to hold in silence. "Mom would have loved this," she said quietly. Cedric nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. They washed the dishes together. Side by side, the penthouse settled around them with sounds it hadn't made in years. Water running, plates clinking, a daughter humming a song her mother used to sing. 2 kitchens, 14 miles apart, both of them full for the first time. Not with food, not with things, with presence. With the quiet, ordinary miracle of people who had been empty finding their way back to something whole. 1 year to the day. The flagship store on Boylston Street had been transformed. The aisles were cleared near the front entrance. 200 folding chairs set in rows. A small stage with a podium. No backdrop, no corporate banners. Just the store itself, the shelves, the lights. The Second Harvest section visible just beyond the last row of seats. 214 people filled the room. Fresh Harvest employees, shelter directors, food bank coordinators, community kitchen volunteers, board members, local press. Families who had walked into the Second Harvest section over the past 12 months and found something they thought the world had stopped offering. A chance. Cedric Moore stepped to the podium. No teleprompter, no speech cards, no prepared remarks vetted by a communications team. Just a man standing in front of a room full of people who had watched something impossible become ordinary. He spoke quietly. 1 year ago tonight, I was sitting in my office, 9 floors above this building. I was reading a quarterly report that told me everything was going well. Revenue was up, expansion was ahead of schedule. Every number looked beautiful. And then I looked out my window, and I saw a woman going through our dumpster. He paused. The room was completely still. I built this company to feed people. That was the whole point. A kid from Bankhead Courts who watched his mother count quarters for groceries. I was supposed to fix that. I was supposed to make it so nobody had to choose between eating and everything else. But somewhere along the way, I started feeding a system instead of feeding people. And that system threw away what people needed most and called it policy. His voice caught slightly. He steadied it. It took a woman with nothing to show a man with everything what he was actually missing. She didn't ask me for money. She didn't ask me for help. She was just trying to feed her children with food. My company had decided was garbage. And when I asked her what she would do differently, she described a better system in 5 minutes than my entire executive team had built in 25 years. He looked toward the front row. "Tamika, would you come up here?" Tamika Hayes stood from her seat in the second row. Not the front. She'd chosen the second row herself. She walked to the stage wearing exactly what she wore every day. Fresh Harvest polo. Name badge. Clipboard tucked under her arm because even tonight she'd been checking the donation cooler temperatures before the event started. She stepped to the podium, looked out at the audience. Her hands were steady. "A year ago, I was behind this building, going through your trash to feed my kids. Tonight I'm standing inside it, helping feed thousands of families. The only thing that changed was someone asked me what I thought instead of telling me what I was." She stopped. That was the whole speech. 7 sentences. Every one of them carrying the weight of everything she'd survived to stand where she was standing. In the front row, Sade waved. Small hand, big smile. The one-eared bunny sat in her lap, attending the ceremony with the seriousness of a guest of honor. Beside her, Jalen sat straight. 11 years old now. Taller. His backpack was at home on his desk, not under his pillow. His eyes were red. He didn't wipe them. He just watched his mother on stage and held himself like someone who understood, even at 11, that he was witnessing the kind of moment you carry for the rest of your life. The numbers from that first year hung on a display board near the entrance: 8.4 million pounds of food rescued, 1.2 million meals created, 127 employees hired from the community's fresh harvest served, 214 stores operating the program. 3 competing grocery chains now running their own versions of Second Harvest modeled on the original. Cedric stood beside the stage watching Tamika return to her seat. She didn't wave to the crowd. She picked up her clipboard and checked something on it. Always working, always moving. Not a symbol, an engine. He thought about Dorothy, about the apartment in Bankhead Courts, about food that had been loved twice. And for the first time in 52 years, Cedric Moore felt like the building he'd constructed around his life finally matched the foundation it was supposed to stand on. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the chairs had been folded and the store returned to its normal rhythm, Cedric stood alone in his office on the 9th floor. He looked out the window. The loading dock below was quiet. The dumpsters were still there. Smaller now. Half the size they used to be because half the food that once filled them now went somewhere else. Somewhere it was eaten. Somewhere it mattered. Beyond the dumpsters, the Second Harvest section glowed through the storefront glass, bright, stocked. A donation truck idled in the side lot, its driver loading coolers for the evening shelter run. 2 employees laughed about something near the back entrance, their breath visible in the March air. This was the same view Cedric had seen 1 year ago. Same window, same building, same city. But the world below it had rearranged itself around a single question asked in the dark beside a dumpster at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Dorothy's words hung in every store now. 214 of them. Forest green banner, white letters. Ain't nothing wrong with food that's been loved twice. Naomi had moved back to Boston 3 months ago. She ran the Fresh Harvest Foundation's Community Programs Division. Every Sunday, she and Cedric cooked dinner together in the penthouse kitchen. The stove stayed warm now. The empty chair had someone sitting in it. The silence that had lived in those rooms for 4 years had been replaced by something quieter and infinitely louder. Presence. Cedric Moore looked out that window, expecting to see a trespasser. Instead, he saw a teacher. The woman going through his trash knew more about his business, his community, and his purpose than anyone sitting in his boardroom. Sometimes the most valuable consultant in the world is the person your system has already thrown away. He didn't save her. She didn't save him. They saved each other from the lie that waste is acceptable, whether it's wasted food, wasted talent, or wasted humanity. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, before you go, a few words from me personally. This story is fictional. The characters are not real, but the problem at the center of it is very real. According to the USDA, between 30 and 40% of the American food supply is wasted every year. That's roughly 80 million tons of food going to landfills, while over 40 million Americans, including 13 million children, live in food insecurity. The Good Samaritan Food Donation Act of 1996 is a real federal law. It protects individuals and companies from civil and criminal liability when they donate food in good faith. It has existed for nearly 30 years. Most businesses still don't use it. The date labels on the food in your kitchen, best by, sell by, use by, are not federally regulated safety dates. With the single exception of infant formula, every date on every product is set by the manufacturer. They indicate quality, not safety. Most food is safe to eat well past those labels. Most of us don't know that. I wrote this story because I believe we don't have a food shortage problem. We have a food distribution problem. And I believe the solutions often come from the people closest to the problem, not the ones furthest from it. If you know a single parent, a shelter worker, a food bank, volunteer, or anyone fighting food insecurity in your community, this story is for them. If you'd like to help, I've linked some resources in the description. Organizations like Feeding America, local food banks, and community fridges are doing this work every single day. Every meal rescued is a meal earned. Thank you for being here.